Hi. So today we are working on the last subunit in module 2, and that is data collection. So it is another source for you to build your research, the data. And we have discussed before that, there are different sources and data that you are going to collect for your research would be the primary source to build up your research. So that's one of the most important thing that you will be focusing on, because without data, you really cannot validate your research claims. So that's something you need to understand before you start collecting your data. You may question, why do you need to collect data? Once you have identified research gap and framed your research question, as we have discussed in the past module, what you need to do is to collect data to answer this research question. And like we have already discussed, if you find that your data is not good enough, or you don't have those data to answer your research question, you may have to keep finding the relevant data, or you need to go back and sometimes make a small edit to your research question based on the availability of the data. However, having said that, I would also advise you to first do an exhaustive search, meaning try to find every nook and corner for the data that is needed to answer the question that you are motivated to answer. You sometimes can feel lazy and feel that, okay, this is the data I have found, and this is my question. So go back and change all the research question and ask a very straightforward research question. While that is not a terrible idea, sometimes you may need to simplify your research, but you still want to look at all the different data sources as much as possible before, you know, raising your hands and changing everything, every research question, or changing your motivation completely. So that's that. So what is data collection in research actually? It can be defined as a systematic method of obtaining, observing, measuring, and analyzing accurate information to support research conducted by groups of professionals, regardless of the field where they belong. Meaning that it has to be a systematic method of obtaining data. It cannot be an unsystematic method. So if you are collecting data for to know the characteristics of people, and you decide to collect that data from 100 people, you have to first define the geographic area they are in. You have to define, say, any other common factors of these 100 people, why you are selecting that population of 100 people. So everything, every step that you are taking before data collection should be documented and should be a systematic method. In most cases, you might be using already pre-collected data, say from Census Bureau or something, but you might also be collecting your own data from, people. So be mindful of the system that you are trying to deploy in the data collection, and be mindful of the different observation, measurement, and analysis you are doing while collecting the data. The questions you need to ask before the data collection would be, so what is the goal of my research? What is that I'm trying to find out? And what type of data is needed to answer those research questions or to uh, reach that goal of my research? What data collection method and procedure am I going to utilize to acquire, store, and process the data that I have gathered? So you just cannot proceed without a plan. You may be collecting like hourly data of rainfall, and you find that you don't have enough instruments or some data storage system for your data collection. Then you have to either stop the data collection process, or you would not collect data for a good amount of time and then abruptly start collecting data for some amount of time. So you need to know the time frame, you need to know in what frequency you are collecting the data and what attributes of the data you need before moving ahead and planning the data collection. So data can be divided into two major categories. One is qualitative data, where you are actually using some type of interview or focus group study or ethnographic study. You actually don't get some numbers or very objective attributes from that data. And there is another type of data called quantitative data, which is something you obtain through survey, some experiments or field observation, but you are actually noting down some objective value for different attributes of the data. I will give you more examples in the slides after this. And both the type of data can be used to answer your research questions. So you have to be, talking about your research scope, the different limitations of this data when you are working on your research, but you can actually you are free to use any type of data while you are building your research, but be mindful of what methods you are using, their limitation, and also you have to state that in your research. So for example, for quantitative data, you can have like age, weight, some distance or IQ values of people. And so this is an example of quantitative data, for example. And then, so age can be 20 year, 30 year, weight can be in kilograms, 80. So, you can have a memo or, metadata to note down which units they are collected in. So it can be pound, it can be kilograms for weight, it can be meters or centimeters for distance, or IQ values. It can be, a ratio and doesn't have any units, so you don't need to write it down there. So make sure you put down as much detail as possible in this metadata sheet, and you are writing down or putting the observed value in your data charts. Most importantly, you might be using some values that are already been collected for you by any organization. Census is one of the organizations that doing most of the data collection for us. So you may not need to worry about it, but what you may need to worry is to carefully understand what the data attributes are, what they have collected, and how you can use to measure your objective in the research. So quantitative data collection methods can include survey, like I explained before, some experiments. If you are a physicist, you are doing some type of lab experiments, you are collecting quantitative data by doing those controlled experiments. You can also do some other, experiments in planning with a control group and a test group, which we can, talk about in depth if you are doing something like that based on your project. And then you can also do different tests, collect some kind of matrix. It could be some market report, sale value, or all these kind of things. They all mm, are quantitative data. So one of the example of quantitative data collection method is survey, and then you can see the different questions that are asked in a census survey. This is a form from Census 2010, and you can look at the different questions and the options people have to answer these questions, and how you can also think about how that can be used to build a data set. So that can be something you can do on your own time. The various common sources of data would be US Census Bureau data, Bureau of Economic Analysis, where you get all the economic activities of different industry. And you also get some economic activity like jobs, etc., in census data. But in census data, you are mostly getting good understanding about geography, the demographics, and characteristics of people, their income, race, etc., etc. Then you have sources for international census, where you can find population and demographic of different countries, their characteristics, but that might not be as detailed as census data of a particular country. Or for example, it may not have the same standard of data collection for such as US Census Bureau. Different countries will have different levels of data collection, but then you can still get a sense of the people and their demographics. And another source of international data is World Bank data. Different economic data would be available for the different countries of the world. So it might be a good idea to Google them and see what you can find. And you have already taken different courses, such as UPL 250, where you have already gone through these common sources of data and used the data to build your project. So you might be already familiar with them. So the qualitative data collection methods include records and documents, interview transcripts, focus groups, and then different observation research, where you are actually observing, recording, or writing down some qualitative aspects of people, but not something that can be described through a single numerical value. So sometimes the qualitative data can be a little objective, like, measuring happiness level, like satisfied, bittersweet, unhappy, eye color, speed. You can use these to build, some level of statistics, or use a mixed method of study. But in other cases, you are actually going through, interviews where you are recording people and, transcribing the audio or video to a text, and then doing more analysis. So this is just an example of different types of interview: a personal interview, structured interview or behavioral interview, telephonic interview, or apprenticeship interview, but you don't need to know all of them. Mostly, you might be doing a personal interview of a group or a panel for your study, or a structured interview of a person or a focus group. Or sometimes if you're doing ethnographic study of some race, you might do like a behavioral interview. So you will be focusing on a particular interview type based on what and how you want to design your research. So then this is another example of how you might, plan a focus group study. So in a focus group, you analyze the session and present it through a written or oral report. You determine the topic and different goals of the focus group beforehand. You choose a location for the focus group in particular. You also identify the different participants who are going to participate, and you recruit at least 6 or 12 of them, and then conduct interview for a fixed time. So between 90 to, it can be 90 to 120, just an example, but it can be really like any amount of time that you think is reasonable for your research. So that's that for the different types of data. And as you will start working on your research and your data collection, I would be giving you more advice on project to project basis.